Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everybody. Hello, Elsa.
Hi, Renee. Welcome. So happy to see you all. I love every 2 weeks getting to see, so many from the Flying Labs network. It's really awesome. Dr. Rishi, are you okay for me to get going on your introduction? Make
Yes,
sure.
Elsa. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Yeah, really great to have you all here. So I'll get introducing our speaker, someone who's really shaping the future of drone technology and making the skies a safer and more innovative place to be and to be working in. So I am really happy to say that Dr. Rishi Balal is joining us again. He was here a few years back, speaking with us about I think at the time things were called using different language, I would say, for UTM and airspace management. So he's the founder and managing director of OpenUTM, which is an initiative that's all about building the digital highways of the sky, basically. So with extensive experience in developing technologies, protocols, interfaces, and has been the forefront of UTM and BVLOS technology for years. He's the primary technical lead behind the OpenUTM project, with experience in extensive experience in UTM and BVLOS flights and unmanned aviation. So when it comes to actually looking at OpenUTM and software that's going to be used on a global scale, we're looking at Dr. Bilal for that initiative. So thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rishi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this, Elsa. It's really a pleasure to be here after, I think it's been a few years. Thank you for your time. What I want to do today is to talk about BB loss flights and also uh, before we get into the technical side, perhaps talk a little bit at a conceptual level. I know we have people with various levels of familiarity and experience with drones. So let me start with the basics, and then obviously we can get into as many details as possible. So I'm going to try to share my screen here, and let's see if you can see this. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm just this is a new setup for me, so I'm just a little bit lost with some of the tools, but let's just bear with me. So as I said, the first thing that we're going to talk today is conceptually about UTM, and just to give you an introduction for what UTM is, and let's say put it into some perspective. Um, Many of you are familiar with drones and obviously are, as being part of Flying Labs, are interested in drone technology. Uh, in this screen, what you see is the different types of drone operations, things like medicine delivery, agricultural inspections, logistics, infrastructure inspections, and so on. So these may be slightly different from what you do, but you know that these type of operations exist and have an interest in them. Basically, what I'm trying to say to you is that there are various different kinds of drone operations that will happen, and this airspace will get crowded because of them. Um, in addition, what you have is obviously all different types of aircrafts that are coming online, so to speak. So you have, for example, this is just a representative image, but you have the fixed wing drones, you have quadcopters, you have, let's say, eVTOLs you may have heard of, you have all kinds of manned aircraft, helicopters, and so on. So what's happening is that the different types of operations are being sort of done or conducted are increasing, and also the different types of aircrafts that are in the sky are also sort of increasing. And in this context, the airspace is getting more and more busy. So the sort of the way this kind of works at a conceptual level is basically the following. You have different types of operations, and in a way, they have a digital first, let's say, means of communication in that they have a digital flight plan. In many ways, right now, the way the airspace is managed is basically from a first come, first served basis, meaning that you have an airspace and whoever files the flight plan first is allowed to use it. In that sense, it gets interesting because the airspace is a limited asset that must be shared. So then how do you share it? What are the rules of this new sharing? And so on is an interesting question. And then finally, you have obviously identification and tracking and things like flight security, deconfliction, and so on. So these form the foundational pillars of a UTM system. Essentially, what we have is new operations, new aircrafts that are mainly digital, and airspace that is limited, but kind of is like a first come, first served basis, and we have identification and tracking. Now, the thing is, these sort of new things are joining the airspace. And for the last, let's say, 100 odd years, there have been certain rules of the airspace, primarily catering to manned aviation or aviation with some kind of a pilot or an ATC in the middle. And obviously, drone technology is or has a heavy focus on automation and so on. So you have this digital aspect to it. And this is what I call as digital aviation. So drone technology represents digital aviation. It's not to say that digitization in aviation wasn't happening, but with the advent of drones, it is accelerating. And so you have an entire system that was built that is under change right now. And as I said, this is just a representative of the kind of vehicles that are entering the airspace as well. So it is important to note that in a manned aviation context, more or less the technology of flights and vehicles has been growing, let's say, steadily. The change is not as dramatic. But of course, with drones, you have all different kinds of drone designs, all different types of capabilities, payloads, and sensors that are on the drones. And so you have, let's say, you're going from a, let's say, more or less static airspace with, it's not static, so to speak, but the technology is not evolving as fast. A commercial airliner still is fixed wing with 2 or 4 engines and so on. And that's been the case for the last 20, 30 years. But of course, drone technology changes at a much more faster pace. Before we continue, I want to sort of set some, let's say, some basics in this case, right? What are we talking about in the context of UTM? And you may have heard about it, but I want to just clarify some terminology. A lot of you who fly drones fly in this left-hand side of the image that you see, which is basically called the visual line of sight operation. You are a pilot, you are supposed to have some kind of a training, and you should always have eyes on the drone. Of course, being a drone pilot is a different level of training than an airline pilot, like, for example, Elsa is. For example, she can fly helicopters and so on. So the level of training is totally different, but you're expected to have some sort of a training and understanding of drone flights and drones and how they operate. And then you are supposed to always maintain eye contact. In addition, if you look at the blue cylinder, basically there are some restrictions placed on the drone, meaning that it cannot fly above a certain level. It cannot go beyond a certain envelope, which is basically the line of sight. In other cases, you have some kind of an operation called as the extended visual line of sight. In many countries, that does not exist. But let's say you wanted to do an inspection of a, let's say, a train line. In many places, what is allowed is that you have some kind of a spotter or an observer or a teammate who has communications with the pilot who can also see the drone. So you can see here that you can extend your operational window when it comes to EV loss. And in many cases, This is used, or let's say some kind of a permission is given by the Civil Aviation Authority to allow these type of operations, obviously because drones are very useful and you can do all kinds of operations with them. Now, what we are talking about is basically the advanced version of this, where you are flying without a pilot, so to speak, with eyes on the plane or the aircraft or an observer. This is called beyond visual line of sight observation, flight. Now, in many cases, in many countries, most of them will be very happy with just VLOS and EVLOS and allowing that. And many people will say, well, BVLOS is very far in the future. We are not ready. It's not the right time yet. And the reason why I bring this up is because you have to be aware of what's going on in your jurisdiction, in your country, to understand this. Meaning for them, VLOS and EVLOS is adequate and they are okay with it. And they may respond to you saying, well, when it comes to BVLOS, it's still under consideration. So in many cases, BVLOS is considered advanced things, advanced operations. And the reason is obvious, because you won't have a pilot, let's say with eyes on the drone. In many cases, you can have like one person operating many drones. So if you look at any sort of security operation, you have many cameras and then you only have one guard, and all the guard is doing is look at the TV screens and seeing if everything is okay. So you can imagine BVLOS like that. These paradigms, depending on where you are, may look very advanced or not so advanced to you. But from an aviation point of view, from Civil Aviation Authority, safety, and all of that point of view, this is considered very advanced. Okay. So for you, it may or may not be advanced, but from a regulatory legal point of view, BVLOS is very advanced. And the main reason for this, just so that we understand and have it very clear, is that aviation is a safety focused systems. Everything in aviation is about safety, safety of obviously the human life first, then the equipment, and obviously everybody else around it. So aviation for the past 100 years has built all kinds of processes, all kinds of methods to ensure safety. And Elsa can talk and many other people can talk about it in great detail, but the gist of it is that the safety relies on some kind of human checking, verification, intervention, and so on. So they have built an entire system like that. Now you can say, well, autonomous drones are more safe, meaning you can program a drone to avoid obstacles, to shut down, to slow down, to not make the mistakes that pilots make, and so on. And that is very true, but you are trying to inject an autonomous system into a system that has human beings operating and managing it. So in many ways, this is not very dissimilar from what's happening on the road, where you have terrestrial cars, for example, Waymo taxis or Tesla taxis that you can order. There is no driver, and they're driving on the road and sharing the road with other drivers. And so it's the same idea where BVLOS operation, you can think of it as a autonomous aircraft entering the airspace and sharing that airspace with other pilots, manned, unmanned, and drones, and so on. Now, this may seem very easy for you or not so easy for you, depending on where you are. But from a regulatory and aviation point of view, there is a huge question mark on safety, basically. And this is where the tension is. And this is where you see some resistance. People say, maybe BVLOS is not for now. People will say BVLOS technologies are not mature. Aviation had 50 years to figure out, and so on. So in many ways, the reason why UTM is interesting and important is not because it allows any of this, but it is really because of BVLOS operations. And as I said to you, it may be that your jurisdiction is not there yet, but obviously things are moving very fast and it will be there sooner or later. And again, this slide highlights the same point where when it comes to operations, really you have many kinds of operations, unlike a commercial airliner, for example, who goes from one airport to the other, or maybe hops like that. But in a BVLOS operation, or because you're essentially programming a robot to fly, You can have free flight, you can have point-to-point operations, multi-point, and so on. So all of this is enabled by software and this technology that is drone technology. But aviation, for an aviation point of view, this is considered very advanced, and people will have a lot of difficulty understanding how can this be safe and so on. So to enable BVLOS, and mainly to enable BVLOS safely, you need something called UTM. And the foundational concept of UTM is the following, which is deconfliction. So obviously you want to be well clear of other aircraft, other, let's say, buildings. Maybe there is a prison and you don't want to fly over the prison and so on. So you have to be well clear and visible. Obviously, there is the air risk and the ground risk, meaning who are you flying over, when are you flying, and so on, flights at night. And that depends on what kind of capability there is. So again, to bring back to traditional aviation, you don't have to worry about that, because if everybody is flying Airbus A320 or a Boeing 737, the capabilities are well known, the risk is well known, the fuel is well known, and sort of you don't have to do this risk assessment for every type of Boeing flight, because it has been type certified. And we can talk about that a little bit. But basically, because you have new kinds of vehicles and new kind of drones flying every time, you don't know what is the capability of the aircraft. And that's why you need something like UTM. And of course, from a commercial point of view, if you want to do BVLOS, it only makes sense if you can scale it. Meaning, if you have one pilot who is going to be a flight manager now, not a pilot, and where he or she is going to look at 5 screens, and these operations will happen autonomously, and all they have to do is to make sure that everything is okay, then that is the only way BVLOS will scale. Meaning, one pilot, one drone, the VLOS type operations is not a commercially viable thing for autonomous vehicles. Just like if you think about a taxi business, Google will not say, Waymo will not say, I will have one driver in every taxi. They will say, I have one manager who manages a fleet of taxis. So this illustration is a very good image to depict what UTM is, because it depends on who you talk to and who is sort of touching the UTM system. So essentially, this is a famous story of an elephant and 7 blind men touching different parts of the elephant. Somebody says, it's a tail, I see the head, and somebody says it looks like an ear, and somebody says it looks like its trunk and feet. So they're touching different parts of the UTM system, but they think about it differently. And this is sort of very interesting, is because UTM in many ways is a connective tissue between different actors. You have manned pilots who are flying helicopters and aircraft and bush aircraft and commercial aircraft and so on. And then you have drone pilots flying drones, and they're sharing an airspace. But the drone pilot's view of the air is very, very different from the manned pilot's view of the air. And this is what this image is trying to show you, which is they're looking at the same thing, which is the airspace, but they are experiencing it very, very differently. So this is an image I took from the FAA, which I really like. Basically, everyone perceives UTM differently. If you talk to the police, they will talk about safety. If you talk to the CAA, they will talk about sort of air risk and ground risk and so on. If you talk to the public, they will start to say stuff like, how do I know it's not going to fall on me, and so on. And so they're all talking about UTM, but they look at it differently. So in the other thing you must understand, if you understand anything from my presentation, is that UTM is not one thing. It's not like a toy or a tool that you buy and then you are done. UTM is a series of things. It's a series of services that together ensures safety. So strategic deconfliction is one UTM service. Remote ID is another UTM service. Traffic information is a third kind of an UTM service, where the police stations and the prisons and the president's houses is a fourth kind of UTM service. So the UTM is an umbrella, and inside it there are individual services that you may or may not want to enable. For example, if you're in the middle of the forest, doing some inspection work or wildlife observation, you don't really need the GeoZone service or the strategic conflict detection service. You may just need remote ID. So the other thing that I want to say to you is that UTM is perceived differently, and it's not one singular tool or a product. When somebody says they are a UTM company, you should ask them what services do they provide, and then they can list it out, meaning I do deconfliction and so on. So this is the sort of the main sort of takeaway from that slide. And finally, before I get to the OpenUTM side, I would really encourage you, if you have an interest, to go to the website of an organization called GUTMA. I'm on the board of it. It's the Global UTM Association. And this is just some example of what they do. They do many, many things. And I have, with Sonia and Elsa and others, a link with GUTMA as well. But the idea here is that this organization focuses solely on UTM. And they do something like what you see on the screen, which is a timeline for drone legislation. So what it does is it tells you what is the sort of where in the sort of enablement of BVLOS operations commercially are different countries. And of course, there is a UTM readiness index and many, many others. But all things UTM, as far as BVLOS is concerned, I would really encourage you to go to GUTMA's website. As I said, I'm on the board. You have my details and contacts, so I'm very happy to talk to you about it as well. But there is a growing community who basically is working on this, working with aviation regulators, again, to enable commercial BVLOS operations. And the reason for that is because it's the commercial taxi service, delivery service, and so on. Okay, questions so far? Okay, let me just continue if there are no questions, immediate burning questions. Now, as I said to you, UTM is an enabling technology, and essentially it deals with how drones are integrated into conventional airspace. So when you talk about UTM, in many, many cases, because you are interacting with manned aviation, you start to get things like what you're seeing on the picture, which is basically airspace types. So you look at the sky, it looks like the sky, but from an air traffic control or an aviation point of view, there are different demarcations of airspaces of where you can and cannot fly. There is a reason, for example, as a drone pilot, you're not allowed to fly above 400 feet. Drones are capped at that. Above which we have airlines and so on. So the point that I'm trying to make to you is that the more you talk about UTM, the more you have to understand that it is sharing a airspace with other users. Essentially, that's what's going on. And these other users have invented a vocabulary, systems, rules, certifications, and all kinds of things on how that access and airspace works. So think about it. If you want to put a robot car on the road, you need to understand how roads are built, what are the rules of the road are, what do yellow lines mean, and what does a red light and a yellow light and a green light mean, and so on, right? So you have to, there exists an entire vocabulary of how roads work. And in that context, you are going to integrate your automatic aircraft, or in this case, drone, into that airspace. And this integration is what UTM enables, basically. And why would you want to integrate? Because then you can do many kinds of operations autonomously and scale, and so on. Okay, so let's just talk quickly about OpenUTM. Let me just see if I can do this. Yeah. So this is just a presentation that I gave about OpenUTM. So far, the first half I just spent on just covering some of the basics of what UTM is and what it can do and so on. And now we will go specifically into what these services look like and the OpenUTM project. As I said to you, I'm not going to cover every single thing. We can leave that some for discussion. Because some of it is ongoing things, but the idea here is to give you an introduction of what OpenUTM can do. So as we can see here, this should look familiar. Basically, in the previous presentation, you saw these kind of different services. that we have that can be done in a BVLOS fashion. So for example, if you have a long railway inspection to do, you can program a drone and then send it off to basically on a trajectory to do the inspection. In the same way, medicine delivery, you pick it up and then you send it to the hospital. It goes to the landing site where it is unloaded. All of these operations in the traditional context need some kind of a company who is interested in financing these or having this delivery service, who then talks to a drone operator like yourself, who you know something about drones, you have pilots who are trained and so on. And the idea here is that the drone operator in turn uses some kind of a UTM provider to connect to the airspace and perform these operations. Now, in many cases, there is only one UTM provider, which is the government provider, meaning they say, oh, you want to fly somewhere, send your flight plan to the government will approve it, and then you can fly. In many cases, in many countries, they are saying, well, it's going to be like a mobile phone network. So you can see this kind of a hexagon shape here, which is basically the idea is that the operator chooses some kind of a provider. So you can think of it as Vodafone or Three or something like that, where you say, I'm going to go to Vodafone and then I will join their network and they will provide me with connectivity and so on. And then I can call anyone who I want to. So the idea here is that the drone operator picks a UTM service provider who then gives them these services. In many cases, the operator may themselves want to be a UTM provider. So that's also an option. So the point I'm trying to make to you here is that how UTM will work in your jurisdiction is a little bit of a question mark because it depends. But all I'm trying to say to you is that sometimes you may say there is one UTM provider provided by the government. Sometimes you may see that there will be like a mobile phone network with there will be many providers who will interoperate. And essentially, sometimes people will say, well, let's see, I'm not really sure how it will work out and so on. So what does a UTM service provider do? That's the question. And this is what this slide tries to answer. As I said to you, UTM is not one thing, although many companies will claim to have this UTM product or something. But in reality, it's a set of services. And you see some of them, let's say, written in this slide: network remote ID, flight authorization, geofence, air traffic, let's say, display, and so on. So these are the services that are provided. So for example, if you use QGCS or Mission Planner or something like that, and you are planning a flight and you want to see what other manned flights are near you, that's the air traffic service. If you want some kind of an authorization from the government that you are going to fly BVLOS, that's the flight authorization service. So these services are provided by the UTM service provider. Now, what's good about this is that you can then start to define what they can do and not do and so on. And what OpenUTM does, as you can see in this picture, is provide an open source implementation of these services. So there is a standard for network remote ID, and OpenUTM implements that standard as open source. So the drone operator can then adopt these and then sort of join the airspace. So as I said to you, OpenUTM really is two things. One is called Flight Blender, and the other, let's say, is called Flight Spotlight. It's a backend and a front end. And what it does is essentially allows you to connect it to your infrastructure and then join the airspace. Just to sort of give you some idea who's using it, we have some test sites that are using it. It gives them the ability to experience the UTM ecosystem. We have some advanced operators. For example, if you have an interest in BVLOS and you know that BVLOS is coming, obviously you can partner with the UTM company, but you can also look at, for example, OpenUTM to sort of build this capability within yourself. Of course, we have a lot of UAV R&D, let's say, activities around UTM. So we have, for example, put OpenUTM in front of a simulator, and you can use it. And then, of course, we have academic institutes also using OpenUTM. As I said to you, it's really three things. It's Flight Spotlight, Flight Blender, and Flight Passport. Spotlight is the front end. So if you don't have a front end to see the maps and so on, then you can use that. Flight Blender is the real backend. So it has UTM services, remote ID, flight authorization, geofencing, and so on. And it's available on GitHub, github.com/OpenUTM. I'm just going to show you some pictures of the tool. Here it is, for example, exactly what you would expect: a map, some kind of geofence information, an area of interest and air traffic. And of course, you have things like flight declarations and so on. One of the benefits of using open systems and open solutions is that you can then customize it for your own jurisdiction and develop a lot of understanding and expertise of how UTM works. So essentially, as I said to you, Flight Blender and OpenUTM is an extensible platform. So I would really encourage you to take a look at the GitHub if you have an interest in in UTM and BVLOS flights, and then understand how, for example, the ASTM standards work. So for those who are unfamiliar, these UTM services that I talked about have standards associated with them now. For example, we have the ASTM standard for remote ID. We have the ASTM standard for sharing flight information and so on. And so these are implemented by OpenUTM. And I would really encourage you, if you're interested, to get into sort of how these things work if you want to go into the real nitty-gritty of OpenUTM. My final sort of point about this is basically it's an open community. We have about 110, 115 people on Discord. And so essentially you can use this link. If you go to openutm.net, it's there as well. But basically you can join, and people, as I said, have a focus on UTM things. Like I showed you, flight authorization, remote ID, questions, comments, people using it, and so on. So you can join that. Obviously, we have a link with Flying Labs and We Robotics, so you will hear a lot more, let's say, around BB-loss in the coming months and so on. But the idea here is that there exists mainly a software development, developer, let's say, focused community that is using there. We have contributors and a lot of students as well. Now, the final thing that I would say to you is that obviously there are many commercial UTM companies, and one of the benefits of having an open source implementation is obviously from the cost point of view, but also we have now an audited and a peer-reviewed code. So all the benefits that you get from open technologies, it is extensible. If you have an understanding of how you want to integrate it with your systems, you can do that. And of course, you can get access to the latest builds and so on. So UTM has a huge number of benefits. And luckily, over the past 7, 8 years, we have worked with a number of, let's say, organizations, as I said, to test sites, government agencies. We have a deployment, for example, in Africa and so on. So to understand some of these, let's say, fairly advanced concepts of BB-loss and UTM app flights. So that's where I will stop. I can talk about a lot of things. I do want to sort of give you a time to breathe and basically just just catch up, and then we can maybe do a Q&A. I'll just stop my sharing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rishi. I find this so fascinating, and have put your openutm.net link into the chat. I think that this is a great time for anyone who has questions about OpenUTM, how to get started on this, and how does it work. I think one of the questions that might come about, Dr. Rishi, is right now there are so many companies that are coming up with UTM platforms or applications, and they're very costly. And how do you see this? Basically, I loved what you said in our previous conversation about how, in 1990, think 1996 or 1998. You used like, I think it was Microsoft or AOL, one of those as an example. And I would love you to kind of share a little bit about how you see UTM developing with this in the future.
Yeah. So there are 2 or 3 ways to answer your question. The first comment I have is basically UTM enables BB loss, or one of the most important things that UTM enables is BB loss. So you have to think about what you are trying to do with regard to BB loss. Now, going from a V loss to a BB loss is a very significant leap in general. It's not, how do I say this to you? It's not just that you decide that you'll be BB loss and so on. So this is a capability that requires a lot of planning, some, let's say, thinking about what you're trying to do for the long term, and so on. So that's the first thing. Now, let's say you have decided to explore BB loss as either as just something that you want to do for your lab or for your company or for your organization or whatever. The first thing that needs to happen then is you need to have this capability called UTM to even do anything BB loss. Because as I said, the government and the authorities will not allow you to do BB loss unless you demonstrate some kind of level of safety and so on. And the way you demonstrate safety is through UTM. So let's say you are doing BB loss and you have said, okay, well, now I need to get this UTM capability. You really have 3 options at that point. One is basically you build it on your own. Some of these standards are open. Some of them have been published and are like 50 euros, $50, something like that. So, okay, it's money, but it's not like crazy amounts of money. So if you decide to build UTM yourself for your organizations, you need to firstly read the standards. Then you need to hire some people, maybe some software kind of people, to understand those standards and then build it for you and integrate it with your mission planner or QGCS or whatever else that you use. And then basically you can do some BB loss testing in a simulator, for example, and so on. That's the build option. Obviously, this takes time, this takes energy, resources, effort, and so on. The second option is the buy option, which is what you alluded to, which is basically all these UTM companies trying to say, well, we can do this for you. We can provide this service for you. We will integrate it with you, and so on. Now, this is a very, let's say, good option if you are looking to, let's say, get started quickly, have a partnership with, let's say, a UTM company, and then they will integrate, and then you are, let's say, in the air, so to speak. The problem with this is obviously the business model, meaning how much are they going to charge from you? How much are you willing to give them? Somebody says something is worth something. How do you know? Maybe you inquire 2 or 3 different, let's say, quotes, and so on. So you're in the buying process, selecting a vendor process, whatever you want to call it. So that has its own pros and cons. Obviously, it is easier than building it yourself, but there are other issues, as you know, meaning how do you pick one company? Maybe you ask somebody and so on. What OpenUTM does is really 2 things. Is it brings in the adopt option, meaning you can consider it somewhere in the middle where you don't have to build everything from scratch, but at the same time, if you are willing to put some more effort and sort of work in, and of course we help and so on, and the community helps, but then you can adopt this open technology and then start to build integrations and understand how it works. So it's a much harder path. It is a lot less, let's say, elegant or not as slick looking or whatever you want to call it, because the integrations will have to be built and so on. But in the long term, it is a much more sustainable path because you are not at the, let's say, mercy of the UTM providers who may or may not change their business model. So the point is that like any open source technology, you have to think about what you're trying to do and then where you see all of this heading for your organization. But basically, what OpenUTM does is provide that adopt option. So to recap, it's build yourself, buy it from a company, or you can adopt it, adopt an existing thing for your own and slowly build the capability in-house. Now, whether that is that's something that you want to do is a discussion. There is no right answer. As I said, maybe sometimes it's good to just partner with somebody and just get on flying. And sometimes it's if you are well funded, then you can try to build it, for example. That's not a bad idea. But really, the third one is OpenUTM, where you can take a look at it. There's a community. You don't have to build everything from scratch. And so questions.
Yeah, I know I have some more questions, but I'm going to open it up to everybody else. Yeah, because I know some of you all are flying BVLOS operations, and some of you are still in more VLOS operations. So, yeah, please go ahead and jump in, everyone.
Tanya has her hand.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I just have one question. To be part of that community, there is a type of requirements to be fulfilled.
No, Dania. Thank you for that question. Basically, it's a Discord community, so anybody is welcome to join. What I would say to you is the following. That is a community of, let's say, UTM experts, and you will see if you look at the Discord chats, it talks about very specific things like, what is the buffers and how do I configure conformance monitoring and so on. So if you are interested in a general conversation about BB I think the best way to do this is via Elsa and Sonia and V Robotics, and maybe that can host some of these conversations for the flying labs. That community is a little bit, let's say, technical and very specific on UTM services. So you have to kind of know what service you're talking about. Like if this is about, for example, network remote ID and so on. So that's that Discord community, just a community of people who are building OpenUTM. And for that, you need a UTM understanding from service levels.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, hi, by the way, I'm Kwama from Sierra Leone Flight Labs. So, I just wanted to ask, so the way I see it, right, it kind of is similar to a RTK network some way, somehow, because if you were to register to a network in terms of that anyways. So I wanted to ask if it would be possible to build a UTM from here, Sierra Leone, especially this location, because with the RTK network, normally we can't log into a network because of we don't have one established around here. So I don't know if maybe it would be different for this.
Yeah. Let's take it step by step. So firstly, can you just clarify what an RTK network is?
What?
What is an RTK network?
So it's real-time kinematics network. So
Okay. Go on.
No, I was gonna say, so it kind of provides corrections for the drone and the GNSS systems.
Okay, fine. Okay, so this is slightly different in that sense. But look, here's the way to think about it. The time you need UTM is when you want to do BB loss, one, or you have some kind of a airspace sharing, let's say, requirement, meaning that you are flying and perhaps somebody else is flying nearby, or you want to share your flight plan with somebody. For example, the authorities may say, hey, you need to declare and send your flight plan to me every time you fly. So anytime you share an airspace or you have to share airspace or flight information, that's the time to think about UTM. Now, the best and the most simplest form of UTM is essentially a WhatsApp um, group call or group chat, meaning you say, well, here's my flight plan. Maybe you send a screenshot of the flight plan and everybody knows that you're flying there. So the thing is that as far as establishing a UTM network is concerned, the first thing you need is a shared airspace. And that obviously comes from the authorities, the Civil Aviation Agency or somebody like that, the air navigation provider, somebody like that would sort of classify an airspace as being a shared airspace. And then you need to think about UTM or enabling that capability as far as UTM is concerned. So the point that I was trying to make to you is that the first step is that you say that we are going to share an airspace. Then the next step is to have UTM capability. And in that case, obviously OpenUTM is an option for you to just adopt and, kind of share your flight plans with that. There is a few other nuances to that, meaning in many cases, I have seen, for example, the Civil Aviation Authority saying, this is a shared airspace, and by the way, everyone will declare their flight plans on this WhatsApp group, for example. And that that is like a very simple form of UTM. And if that is the case, then you have to do that, obviously. But if you want to get a little bit more sophisticated and you know that WhatsApp is not going to work for the entire country and so on, so then you start to think about UTM seriously. Am I sort of clear in that sense? Like it's a step-by-step thing, starting with the shared airspace and the requirement to share something about your flight plan or intent.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. It's much more clear now. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you so
you. It's much
much.
more clear now.
Thanks, Kwama. So there are a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is from Morocco Flying Labs, and that's how do we contribute if we want to customize OpenUTM for agriculture?
Yeah. So there are two or three things. So it's an open source project. So basically, it's on GitHub. From a technical point of view, what you need is basically some kind of a person who understands GCS, some kind of a computer, let's say, I would say programmer, but something like that. And they would then sort of contribute back to the project. But generally, the way this works is the following. You have this person in your flying lab or in your organization. You say to them that this is a UTM project that we want to use. They can download it and customize it. As I said to you, it's not as easy as click, 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 and you are sort of there. You will need some expertise for it. So I would recommend some person that you trust and who has sort of done some IT type work for a few years. And so he can or she can sort of help you with that. Then basically, depending on his or her skill, then we can start to do the customization for agricultural operations. I would also sort of ask you to think about what are you trying to do? Meaning, are you trying to record and share flight plans? Is that the idea? Maybe UTM is useful for that. If you're trying to do network remote ID or some kind of a remote ID type sort of a case where you want to share the location with the authorities or something like that, maybe then you can use UTM. So to take it step by step, I think you need to form some kind of a fundamental use case, again, to demonstrate safety. And in that case, I would really recommend you talk to Elsa and others to sort of, from a BB loss point of view, how you engage with the authorities. And then once you have decided that you want to do some BB loss operations in agriculture, then you need the UTM capability. I think it is very tempting to jump into this, but I do think that if you spend some time and to figure out what exactly you're trying to do, and as I said, UTM may be very far-fetched in many cases, but it's coming. So, just take it step by step, figure out your use case, and really it's a safety demonstration. So if you say to the authorities, I want to fly BB-LOS, they will say, how do I know you're safe? And then you start to say, well, I've customized OpenUTM and so on.
Thank you so much. So another question is from James from Nigeria Flying Labs. He says that he's considering integrating OpenUTM into a flight management software product they've been working on for a while, or he's been working on for a while.
Yep.
OpenUTM will speed up the development since we won't have to build everything in the UTM aspect from the ground up. So it's a little bit more of a question statement there. So what are your thoughts on that? And how would you suggest, does it correlate with the questions beforehand? And what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. So this is a very common use case, by the way, which is a lot of organizations that we work with already have some kind of a fleet tracking software or some kind of a pilot management software, meaning that they have a way to do flight planning, they have a way to track pilots and so on. And they are looking for a UTM, let's say, for the lack of a better word, module or something like that. And so in that sense, it would fit very nicely with what you're doing, because what you can say is, as you said yourself, you don't have to build everything from scratch. What you do need to do is to understand where those integrations are. And sometimes people say to us, as in OpenUTM, the company, like, do that for us. But sometimes for somebody like yourself who is already building, let's say, fleet management software and so on, it shouldn't be that hard, and there's a Discord community. But you're right, it will save you exactly what you're saying, which is not have to build everything from scratch, and then just take that and then sort of just integrate that. And we have 2 or 3 operators, not Flying Labs, just normal operators who do it like that, where they say, well, we're going to integrate it and then get that thing approved, the integration approved from the authority. And so, yeah, so the cost savings and the time savings is exactly what you said, which is not having to build everything from scratch. And this kind of, unfortunately, fortunately, when you start to say, I'm working with OpenUTM and so on, then people start to think, oh yeah, meaning it's a well-established project. In the same way, if I say I'm using Firefox, you kind of have some level of trust, and that this is a legit browser or something like that.
Wonderful. I think that answered and also continued that discussion there. So yeah, anyone else have any questions? We have probably time for 1 or 2 more. If anyone
I have one
has
also
a
at the end,
question.
maybe.
Oh yeah. Anyone? Or go ahead, Dr. Rishi.
I guess this is a question for the entire group. If you can maybe unmute yourself and just tell me, it's hard for me to judge where you are in that VLOS to BVLOS journey. Maybe I would love to know how seriously you're thinking of BVLOS. Have you done BVLOS flights? Do you, maybe your experiences with BVLOS? I'm just kind of leaving it open in that sense. With the authorities, with just yourself at the Flying Labs, and maybe what's happening in your country or jurisdiction.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I think I'm going to start and build the cards. So for our country here, I'm in Nigeria, by the way. I'm James. I think we talked via email some weeks
Correct.
ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello, James.
In Nigeria, we do have beyond visual line of sight operations being done by a few companies, especially in the inspection side of things in oil and gas sector. So we do have a few companies running BVLOS operations, but for us in the Nigeria Flying Labs, we do not have those. We just have visual line of sights and a few times extended. But personally, as a person, I mean, myself, that's kind of tautological. I do have very strong interest in beyond visual line of sight, and that's from an engineering perspective. The very first drone I built, I was building it as a proof of concept where I I was eliminating the RF transmitter entirely. So it had a modem, and I was, connecting to the drone via the internet and stuff like that. So that was the very first drone I built, and I have that very strong interest in BVLOS, because I think that's where we are going to be heading to. Everybody's going to be heading in that direction very soon. So I've also been working on a software, like I mentioned in the comment section, that handles flight management for visual line of sight operations and BVLOS. So it's more like flight planning for visual line of sight operations, and then flight management for BVLOS. And so, I mean, hearing about OpenUTM is a very, very good thing for me. And I think I'm going to be working a lot with OpenUTM in the next few weeks.
Nice, thank you. Others? Have you thought about BVLOS? Do you know about BVLOS? Have you been exposed to it?
I think everyone's being a little quiet because I know,
But Elsa, would you
that,
have thoughts about that? Like,
yeah,
would you?
yeah. So I mean, I think about BV loss on a daily basis. And I think many people here know that my background in UAS is BV loss. It's only BV loss operations. So I think that it's very I mean, it's totally possible. It's so important for the future of aviation. As you presented in your beginning slides, what it can be used for, and that's what many people hear: agricultural initiatives, medical initiatives, cargo delivery. It's definitely UTM and BV loss is at kind of the forefront of my thinking. So I know that people here are definitely working on that and working with, even if they're not doing it in their flying labs right now, they're talking to their regulators about it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely amazing. I know that we are at time now, but if it's okay with you, I've shared OpenUTM, the link to the OpenUTM website, and then also if you're okay, Dr. Rishi, for me to share your contact information.
Oh yeah.
I know that some people will probably feel more comfortable asking questions outside of the group, but yeah, we're really, really appreciative of your insight. It's absolutely incredible to see what is happening, how it's going to happen. I also love that this is an initiative that's going to be for everyone. I know that many of the applications right now are very cost prohibitive, and we won't be able, not many people will be able to utilize those platforms right away. So this is giving kind of a collective, open opportunity for everyone to be involved, and I really appreciate that. So yeah, thank you. There was one, I'm so sorry if you have one more minute, a question on
Yeah, for sure. I have time.
Okay, there's one more question, which is a question on UTM from an ATM service provider perspective. Can this UTM be integrated on the existing traditional ATM tools like radar and flight data management? And that's from Joel.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joe. How much time do you have in my answer? We can go into great detail. Look, again, UTM. So let's take it step by step. In my language, in my understanding, an integration with ATM and UTM is considered very advanced. So let me put that first. Meaning, if you think of a crawl, walk, run analogy, integration of ATM and UTM systems is the run aspect of it. Maybe you should start by crawling, meaning if you are flying in an agricultural field away from people, away from airports, away from the city, you really don't need ATC involvement in that sense. So the first thing I would say to you is that UTM, if you want to start PV loss, you don't start in the middle of the city beside an airport and so on. You start it in a reasonably less risky area. Now, the second thing about it, which is, I don't know if you have an ATC background, but most ATC have no interest in UTM or drones, meaning that they are stressed enough and the job is very difficult already that basically they really don't want anything to do with drones, or at least management of drones and giving instructions to drone pilots and so on. And in many cases, there are no systems to do that anyways. What has happened in other jurisdictions is, which is basically the following, which is if you think of a area called U-Space in Europe, which you may have heard of, basically what that is like on an ATC screen or on the radar, you will see like a box or like a circle or whatever. And the ATC knows that drone activity is happening there. And that's about it. They don't care about what's happening in the box. All they have to sort of be aware of that box exists and that they should divert manned aircrafts away from it. Obviously, ATC will not be managing drones. I think that's totally unreasonable. I think that this ATM to UTM integration is the hardest bit, and in many cases it will come last. So I think that while it's interesting and many companies claim to sort of do this, I do think that UTM is much more simpler when you manage the risk in an appropriate way. You will not be able to fly near the airport, but I mean, that's maybe the railway station. I don't know, something else might be a more useful point of start. So yeah, I think I would say don't worry about that so much. I think about things like network remote ID, just declaring flights, having some kind of an air traffic. I think then eventually you'll think of how do I integrate it with manned aviation, and you have to deal with ATCs who don't want to deal with it. I don't know, Elsa would have some comments on this, but it's the same, I would say. Most ATCs are busy enough that they don't.
Yeah, it's very similar to, and my comments would be very close to what you just mentioned. And I know that we are a bit over time, and I want to respect everyone's time, especially yours, Dr. Rishi. Thank you so much for giving over an hour of your precious time to us and everyone. I'm really looking forward to talking to you more about this in the future. I know we've had a couple of discussions now about UTM and the future of UTM, U-Space, airspace traffic management. So really looking forward to continuing this discussion and maybe having maybe a discussion every quarter or so about this. But thank you all for joining, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, would like to get more involved in this. And then also I can share Dr. Rishi's email address. But thank you all again for joining, and for you, Dr. Rishi, amazing work, absolutely amazing. So I'm really excited to see how this is going to continue and take off in the future. Yeah, thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day or morning or afternoon. I think we're in all different time zones right now. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you. See you later.
everyone.